And the little, she had the little, little boy right next to him. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What up? What up? We stuck in it, boy. Colonel Love, stop it.
That's tight. Shut.
They're taking a video. Take the cut.
Thanks for coming out. Okay?
Pleasure.
Stop by and see me before you leave.
I told you when to approach on. Yeah.
Mr. Scott Taylor. Hey guys. There you go. How you doing? Good.
Birdman. They gonna do a video. There we go.
That's right.
Birdman, always my nephew son, you know? Definitely rooting for Lizzie right there. That's my girl, Lizzie. Oh, yeah, there you got nuts. Oh,
The video right now. Birdman.
Represent.
have this cheesy aluminum solder, or some people call it aluminum brazing wire. I'm heating this mother freaking aluminum pipe, the sleeve, to the point where the freaking metal is melting the aluminum itself. Allegedly, you're supposed to heat this sucker up very hot to the point where it can melt this aluminum brazing wire or solder wire. And the freaking thing, the pipe, look at that, the whole pipe itself. The integrity of the pipe is gone. It's melted, and this freaking brazing crap hasn't even did crap. I heat this freaking pipe easily up to 300 degrees. Now the temperature's dropping over 300 degrees to the point where the freaking pipe itself, check that out, so much heat it is actually melting the pipe itself. The metal was bubbling up because the temperature was so hot of aluminum, and this freaking cheap, I want to say arse crap hasn't done anything. The whole point is to seal these little gaps in between the flanges that the welder would not get to. Now this is so small that you can't even get, you can barely get a pencil. You can't even get a pencil actually in between it. It'll just fit barely in between us, barely. So you can only imagine the head of a torch. So the game plan was to heat this up hot enough to get the brazing wire to go across this gap and melt into position. Not working. My backup plan is an epoxy, and they've tested this epoxy to over 5,000 psi, which is definitely good enough, and it's sandable and everything. So I'm gonna have to go with the epoxy, and I'll do the epoxy on the outside as well as the inside and port it out. But I wanted to go with the aluminum if possible. But if it's going to, and my instinct was, let me go ahead and test the piece of metal first, because I heated this up for a good 4 minutes. Nothing was starting to happen at all. And I'm like, man, let me go ahead and just use a test piece. And as you can see, the integrity of the aluminum is ruined because I've heated it up so hot, and this mother freaking wire did not even melt in the slightest bit at all. So that's definitely a buzz. We're going to go with the epoxy. I use JB Weld epoxy to completely seal the whole inside diameter of the sleeves that I welded onto my flange. On pipes 2, 4, and 6, I was able to weld those on first, and I got a complete weld all around each one of those pipes. On pipes 1, 3, and 5, I was able to weld almost all the way around except for in between here. So I actually sealed the whole complete inside of the runner itself, and it's added additional sealant on the outside between each one of the runners where I could not get the welder at. And we'll see. So we'll let this sit overnight to cure. Once it gets hard, I'll come back probably tomorrow evening and sand this nice and smooth and begin port matching everything and take a look at it to see how everything turns out. Now, allegedly, this is rated over 5,000 psi of pressure. So our goal is to maintain at least 50 to 80 psi, possibly 100. Not sure if we'll ever get to that number. I can't say never, but with the progression of our VR6 project, you never know. But either way, I want this to at least maintain and hold at least 80 psi, so that way we can produce some big horsepower numbers. And while we're producing them numbers, we don't have any problems with any type of boost leakage, at least from the intake manifold or anything like that. I did some sample sanding in the port match and sand down the epoxy, and it actually turned out pretty good. Even though you can see the difference in colors from the aluminum and where the epoxy seats in at, it is literally smooth to the touch all the way around. There's no bumps or no type of lips or anything. You can see like where a weld kind of heated up and bubbled up. The epoxy sealed around it, and I actually sanded it flush. So rubbing through everything with the finger is totally smooth on the inside. So that's exactly what I want it to be. So for example, this is one that's slopped up full of epoxy. and I'll do the same thing to, this would be 3 and 5. So the other ones aren't really bad. I'll just port match them a little bit. Like for example, this is 2, and where the joints end together, you can just see where the weld heated up and gave a little bubble on the inside. I'll go all around that and port match the inside of that. But other than that, the ports are totally smooth. So hopefully this will seal and will not leak. And as I stated before, I sealed on the inside as well as the outside, and I'll just sand the outside down just a little bit. Also, even though the fill rail is going to be covering it, just for minor aesthetics, but the whole thing is I'm worried about function primarily and making this thing hold boost pressure to produce or assist with producing major horsepower. Okay, just a slight update. What I've done, I have, this plate's probably like about 3/8 inch thick, heavy duty steel, and before I weld this to my backing plate for the plenum, I would like to make sure that everything is squared up first. So what I did was, I'm gonna just loosen this up with the vise. I got it with one hand, try not to drop it. Okay, cool. Pre-drill the holes that'll fit in here perfectly, as well as the fill rail. Have the hose for that all set up so everything would line up great in here like this. All the holes and everything squared up, so I can bolt this whole assembly if I want to this plate, just to make sure once I weld everything up, I got a totally flat surface and it'll be squared up properly. So what I'm going to do first is continue to port match everything, get everything clear. This is smooth to the touch, very smooth, so no ridges, no bumps or anything in here. My plan is to do the same, smooth all of these ports out, and then I can kind of lightly sand. These are areas that I could not get my welder in between, so I epoxied the inside the runners as well as the outside to prevent any leaks. So what I will do is boost pressure test it. I'll use the compressor, plug the hose, pressure test it to about 70, 80 psi, maybe 90 or 100 if I'm gambling, but either way, if it can hold up to at least 80 psi, I'll be happy, so that when this bad boy is up and running, if bro want to crank the boost up and we get to the point where we're tuning this thing up to 80, 90 psi, then this plenum will hold without any leaks. So let's get to it. Okay, this is what I did. I got a Sharpie and put black markings around each one of the runners, just so that once I put it in the belt sander, I can see which ones were kind of off once I bolted this flat to this thick piece of steel. So as you can see, all 4 of the center runners, they are pretty good. This was probably slightly beveled just a little bit because of the heat distortion from being welded, and all the heat cycles from welding back and forth for each one of the runners. So my whole key point was to make sure I get this flat as possible before I do any welding. Of course, once I get everything welded up, I'll just lightly run the belt sander on the backside also, just to make sure I got a nice tight fit. The back part of this flange is O-ring, but you can see right here, there's a little markings with the Sharpie, as well as this whole runner right here didn't even really make contact. So my center ones were sticking up a little bit higher. I'll continue to sand these down, get them all flush again, and that's the objective. And then I can finally get to the stage where I can prep and tack weld, and I'll bring it out the back of this to here. So I wanted to make sure I got a nice flat surface, so that way when these 2 pieces are mated together, this is already flat. I don't want it to be beveled over, and then when I go to sand everything down or bolt it up, it's warped on this side. So it's best to get this thing totally flat as possible first before I do any type of welding up for my final product. This is the baseline version, or version 2 of my intake manifold modification. So I had to extend the runners because before it was too tight of an angle to get my fill rail to fit in between here. So now I can actually literally, once I take it off the car, I can take my fill rail in and out, which is great. So of course it would be hard to get bolts through here because it's not enough clearance to get a long enough bolt through here and the thread into the cylinder head. So the next option would be to use studs. So I'm gonna use studs on the lower section. I'll put 3 studs in the bottom. That way I can slide the whole plenum on as one assembly and then run nuts on there to secure the assembly, and then I can use bolts to secure the top just as the factory installation. But let's do a dry fit to see if and get the idea of the angle and fitment, and then secondly I'll put on the plenum to see how we look. It is dark out here and definitely past my bedtime, but I'm out here just doing a test fit because I want to get as much of this project done as possible. So we have the plenum bolted in position, and let's red my light because it's dark. You can see the studs are sticking out, so I have plenty of clearance on the bottom to run nuts to secure that on when the fill rail is in position, that lower fill rail. So this will have 3 fill rails. It'll have the 2 for direct injection, which is the lower one here, this upper rail that's just sitting in place, as well as another rail that bolts in here for 6 port injectors. So we'll have direct injection and port injection. But now the kicker is, let's get the front end just bolted back in place and see how this fits. Let's see what we have is in there, and it's looking good. We have this thing in there, and it is a tight fit, but we have clearance. You can see, like from the top of the radiator cover, I can get like a finger in there, but it is close. So hopefully that'll allow for engine rock back and forth. But the whole main point is in there. We have room for all 3 fill rails, my 2 upper rails, as well as my lower rail. I don't have the lower rail in yet. I just have it right here. I only have 2 studs in there, and like I said before, we do have the clearance down there to run a bolt on the stud. So that's enough room for the fill rail to stick out, as well as to run a nut on each stud that's sticking out and bolt everything down in place. So I just wanted to do just a dry mock-up and test. The original setup that I had, we had the runners shorter, but a spacer in here that was 1 liter. So it was either run the 1 liter spacer and no lower fuel rail, and that would defeat the purpose of our direct injection. So the custom-made pistons, all of this whole setup was for the usability of running direct injection, as well as our port fill injection also. So I had to extend the runners, which I did, and measure and make sure I have enough clearance, so that way when I pull the whole plenum out, I can pull the lower fill rail off with it, remove it out of position. We can always do something, bolt it back in, but it makes for easy removal. Before, I could have had a tighter fit where I could have welded everything in place and just left the fill rail sandwiched in between here, but that would have been kind of cheesy, and I just would not have been satisfied with that. I like the fact of being able to remove this fill rail if we need to do any modifications, or just for taking the fill rail off for anything, just the fact that it can come off. I would not like a fill rail mounted permanently in between the plenum. So that part looks pretty good. Now I can just go ahead and probably perform a complete weld. I just tack welded, right, as you can see, a little tack here and 2 tacks on upper just to hold everything in place, and another little tack weld on the side right here just to make sure everything, I clamped it really tight at my vise just to make sure everything was super tight. And then once everything's welded back up, I can go for the final port match. And the ports are going to be a little bit larger, which is still good because of the angle of the pipe. So instead of the hole just being more of a narrow hole, I had to cut this pipe on an angle, which made the opening a lot wider than original. So more airflow, and the angle is positioned as the air shoots up from the bottom. And you can see it'll come in and it's going to funnel pretty good into this plenum from the way everything is set up, especially with having to open up each one of the runners a lot more. So whew, I can sleep comfortable and knowing that we can keep moving forward to the next step now. I'm about to wrap it up for the night. So the kicker is all of this will fit nice and neatly, even though it's stuffed in this engine compartment. And the best thing about this, we do have great hood clearance, which is excellent. And if we just wanted to run a different hood for the track, we can take off, this can be in street trim, this filter can come off, and the hood, as I stated, it closes good, nothing's touching. We can cut open a ram air opening that can ram right through the front of the hood like a velocity stack, and then shoot directly into the turbo, which is right here. So that'll be right here as air funnels over the front of the car. That would be a nice inlet just for ramming air directly in the turbo. So that's in an excellent position as well. So it's starting to turn out pretty good. Very tedious, very time consuming, because I work a full-time job, and after work every day I'll come out, if I'm not too tired from work, and just try to do a little something to this project to keep moving forward so we can get this thing up and running. So we'll see if we can get this bad boy ready for the beginning of the season. That is my objective now, and just putting some numbers on the board and having fun with this beast.